50 years ago, the average American slept 8 hours a night, and nobody was selling them anything to make it happen. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, published in 2023, more than 1 in 3 American adults now sleep fewer than 7 hours each night. Over 100 million Americans are chronically sleep deprived, more than the combined populations of California, Texas, and Florida. Chronic insomnia is one of the most misunderstood health conditions in older adults. And most of what we think we know about it turns out to be wrong. This is the story of what neuroscience has known for 20 years, but still hasn't said loudly enough to the people who need to hear it most. To understand why, we need to start with what your body is actually doing during the hours your eyes are closed. Sleep is not a state where the body simply shuts down. It is a complex biological cycle of 4 to 6 loops, each lasting roughly 90 minutes. During deep sleep, your brain is consolidating memories, your body is producing growth hormone, and your immune system is repairing cells in ways that no waking hour can replicate. There is something acting as the central biological clock that coordinates this entire process. It is called the circadian rhythm. Your circadian rhythm runs on a 24-hour cycle, relying on light, temperature, and meal times to know when to be awake and when to sleep. When all of these signals are synchronized, sleep comes easily, runs deep, and mornings arrive, feeling genuinely rested without an alarm clock needed. This is exactly how our grandparents slept. And it is also how the aging body is designed to sleep when nothing gets in the way. However, after age 50, the body begins undergoing real physiological changes that genuinely affect sleep. And it matters to know which changes are normal and which ones are not. Research published in Sleep Medicine Reviews in 2019 showed that older adults naturally sleep 1 to 1.5 hours less than younger adults. But the overall sleep need does not actually decline. Specifically, the aging pineal gland produces less melatonin over time, causing the biological signal that says it's time to sleep to become genuinely dimmer than it was in younger years. At the same time, the circadian rhythm tends to shift earlier with age, meaning older adults commonly feel sleepy earlier in the evening and wake earlier in the morning. This is normal aging, not illness, and it requires no treatment so long as the quality of sleep within those hours remains genuinely deep and restorative. But when sleep begins fragmenting, when you wake multiple times each night, when mornings arrive with the same exhaustion that was there at bedtime, that is when the boundary between normal and pathological begins to blur. And this is precisely what our grandparents' generation rarely experienced to the degree our generation does, despite the fact that we have far more sleep tools available to us than they ever had. Which raises a question genuinely worth sitting with, which is, where exactly did we go wrong? The answer does not lie in any app, does not lie in any pill, but rather in a complex picture of how modern life has systematically disrupted the oldest biological signals our bodies have. Let's begin with the number one culprit that most people don't recognize, which is light itself. Light is not merely a comfort issue. It is the language your body uses to locate itself within the day and decide when to release melatonin. A 2017 study from Harvard University found that blue light from phone screens suppresses melatonin production twice as effectively as standard yellow light in the evening hours. What that means is that when you scroll your phone at 10 o'clock at night, you are essentially telling your brain it is still the middle of the afternoon. Consider what happens next when the brain receives this false signal every single night for months and then years on end. The circadian rhythm begins to drift out of alignment. And when that happens, it is not only sleep that is affected, but also body temperature regulation, cortisol secretion, and digestive function. Our grandparents simply did not face this problem because their evenings were genuinely darker, genuinely warmer in light tone, and genuinely quieter than ours. Here is what most of us haven't grasped. The problem is not that our brains are broken, but that we have been continuously feeding them false information about what time of day it actually is. But light is only part of the story. And the second piece involves something our grandparents did naturally every single day, without anyone reminding them. Daytime physical movement is one of the most powerful signals the body uses to build sleep pressure, which is the accumulated biological drive to sleep that builds throughout the day. According to research published in the Journal of Clinical Sleep Medicine in 2015, older adults who exercise regularly fall asleep faster and experience significantly more deep sleep than sedentary adults of the same age. Our grandparents walked more, worked physically more, and genuinely expended energy throughout the day, and their bodies repaid them with quality sleep at night. With millions of older Americans today living more sedentary lives than any previous generation, their bodies reach the end of the day not genuinely tired. And that makes it harder for the brain to establish that now is the time to sleep. The third disruptor is the least talked about of all, and it is temperature. To initiate sleep, your core body temperature needs to drop by roughly 1 to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And this happens naturally when the surrounding environment is cool enough to allow it. Our grandparents lived in homes where interior temperatures naturally declined with the outdoors at night. Central air conditioning did not run all night at a fixed cold setting, and their bodies received the right thermal signal at the right moment. Think of it this way: your body's sleep temperature regulation system was fine-tuned across hundreds of thousands of years of evolution to respond to the natural temperature arc of the outdoor environment, not to a room mechanically cooled to an identical level every hour of the night. Now we reach the fourth disruptor, what researchers call sleep hygiene erosion. And this is where the generational difference becomes the most stark. Our grandparents had consistent sleep schedules, not because they were more disciplined than us, but because their lives simply did not contain enough stimulation to pull them past a natural bedtime. Here is the counterintuitive truth. While we tend to think that more entertainment choices mean a better life, our brains interpret those choices as biological signals that the day is not yet over. Your central nervous system cannot meaningfully distinguish between watching a thriller at 11 p.m. and genuinely facing a real threat in the physical world. The result is that cortisol levels in your bloodstream remain elevated at the time when they should be falling. Your body stays in an alert state, and the brain cannot shift into deep sleep mode even when your eyes are closed. This does not only affect how you feel the next morning, it accumulates into a biological debt that the aging body finds far harder to repay than a younger body would. Now we arrive at the part that surprises most people, which is the role of chronic psychological stress and how it permanently alters sleep architecture if left unaddressed. Chronic stress activates the HPA axis, meaning the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, causing the body to continuously produce cortisol at elevated levels even in the absence of any clear threat. For older adults, this is particularly concerning because the brain's ability to regulate cortisol declines with age. Confirmed in a review by the National Institutes of Health in 2021, this is not a matter of willpower or attitude. This is pure physiology. And it explains why older adults living with financial stress, loneliness, or grief often sleep significantly worse than peers who do not carry those burdens. Which brings us to the sixth factor, something our grandparents literally had without realizing they had it, which is community and social scheduling. Having fixed social schedules, eating dinner at the same time each evening, Sunday morning church, regular neighbor contact, all of these function as biological time anchors that stabilize the circadian rhythm. Science calls these social cues Zeitgebers, German for time givers, and modern research confirms that a lack of Zeitgebers is an independent cause of sleep disruption in older adults who live alone, with more than 28% of Americans over 65 now living alone, according to the U.S. Census Bureau in 2023. This is a major risk factor that rarely comes up in a doctor's appointment. For the millions of older adults reviewing their lab results alone in a clinic waiting room, the real question is not just what is wrong with me, But why nobody has asked how I am sleeping? Now we reach the part many people have been waiting for, which is the role of alcohol and the mild sedatives that older adults commonly self-administer to help themselves sleep. Alcohol does make you feel drowsy, that part is real. But according to Mayo Clinic research, it disrupts REM sleep in the second half of the night, precisely the phase the brain needs most for emotional processing and memory consolidation. Older adults are particularly vulnerable to this effect because the liver's ability to metabolize alcohol declines with age, causing alcohol to remain in the bloodstream longer and disrupt sleep for a greater portion of the night compared to younger adults drinking the same amount. It is worth noting that our grandparents generally drank less alcohol in the evening than the current middle-aged generation does. And that pattern looks less coincidental the more we understand about sleep biology. The same principle applies to over-the-counter sleep aids, particularly those containing diphenhydramine, the antihistamine commonly found in Benadryl and ZZ-Quil. According to guidelines from the American Geriatric Society, diphenhydramine appears on the Beers criteria list of medications to avoid in older adults because it impairs cognitive function and can cause temporary cognitive disruption, particularly in people over 70. More critically, all sedative sleep medications, including prescription ones, mimic sleep without replicating true sleep architecture, meaning the genuine deep sleep stages are not actually occurring. Here is what many people genuinely do not realize. A sleeping pill does not give you sleep in the biological sense. It renders you unconscious. And those are two profoundly different things. This does not mean sleep medications have no role in medicine. They do, and your doctor is the best person to evaluate when they are appropriate for your specific situation. The larger question is, why do we need sleep medications at a historically unprecedented rate while the generation before us did not? Part of the answer lies in something almost nobody thinks about, which is diet composition and meal timing. Eating late at night, especially foods high in sugar and refined carbohydrates, raises core body temperature and activates digestion at precisely the time the body should be preparing for deep sleep. Our grandparents ate dinner earlier, snacked far less at night, and typically maintained a gap of 3 to 4 or more hours between the last meal and bedtime, allowing the body to reach a sleep-ready state at the right time. But of everything, the one thing that modern sleep science emphasizes above all others is the one thing you cannot buy, cannot download, and cannot program. It is temporal consistency, meaning going to bed and waking at the same time every single day, including weekends. According to a University of Michigan study in 2021 analyzing data from over 900 participants, sleep timing variability of 30 minutes or more per day significantly increases the risk of chronic insomnia. Our grandparents needed no app to remind them to go to sleep at the same hour because the natural structure of their daily lives created that consistency automatically. Consider what happens to a 68-year-old living inside the negative feedback loop of insomnia, where the anxiety about sleep itself becomes the very thing preventing sleep. Psychologists call this conditioned hyperarousal, where your bed, your bedroom, and even the thought that it is time for sleep begin triggering an anxiety response instead of a sleepiness response. This is precisely why cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, known as CBTI, is now ranked by Harvard Medical School, the National Institutes of Health, and the American Academy of Sleep Medicine as the first-line treatment for chronic insomnia, ranked above sleep medications. CBTI is not conventional talk therapy. It is a structured set of techniques that directly target the psychological and behavioral associations the brain has formed with the bed and with sleep itself. The evidence for CBTI is strong enough that a 2015 meta-analysis published in the Annals of Internal Medicine found it as effective as or superior to sleep medications over the long term with no side effects. And here is the troubling part. The proportion of older Americans accessing CBTI remains far lower than the proportion using sleep medications, despite decades of clear evidence in its favor. That is not the fault of doctors, and not the fault of patients. but the result of a healthcare system designed for speed over depth. Now, let's talk about something that fewer people recognize, but can profoundly damage sleep quality in older adults, which is obstructive sleep apnea. Sleep apnea occurs when the airway narrows or becomes blocked during sleep, causing breathing pauses that can last from 10 seconds to over 1 minute, pulling the brain out of deep sleep each time this happens. According to data from the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, more than 20% of adults over 65 have moderate to severe sleep apnea, and the majority are undiagnosed. Untreated sleep apnea does not merely degrade sleep quality. It is directly linked to hypertension, cardiac events, stroke, and cognitive decline, according to data from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The good news is that sleep apnea can be diagnosed with a sleep study, which is now possible at home in many cases, and treatments such as CPAP have been shown to substantially reduce associated health risks when used as directed by a physician. All of this together creates a clear picture. The collapse of sleep quality in modern older Americans does not come from any single cause, but from the convergence of multiple lifestyle and environmental factors acting simultaneously. And our grandparents' generation solved all of those factors, not by deliberately addressing them, but by accidentally living in an environment that had not yet been disrupted by them. That places the burden on our generation to deliberately recreate what they did naturally, and to do it consciously in a world that is effectively designed to obstruct sleep. And here is the genuinely good news. Science knows exactly what needs to change, and most of it does not cost $1. But before we reach the action section, we need to look squarely at what chronically insufficient sleep actually does to the aging body. Not to frighten, but to genuinely understand the scale of the stakes. According to a 2017 meta-analysis published in the journal Sleep, sleeping fewer than 6 hours per night over the long term increases cardiovascular disease risk by 30% in older adults. Chronic sleep deprivation raises levels of inflammatory cytokines in the bloodstream, a process scientists call inflammaging, which is inflammation associated with aging, and this is the mechanism connecting poor sleep to a wide range of chronic diseases. Even more notable is the connection between sleep deprivation and cognitive decline, a relationship that the National Institute on Aging has made a focal point of its research over the past decade. During deep sleep, the brain's glymphatic system activates to flush waste products from neural tissue, including beta amyloid, one of the proteins implicated in Alzheimer's disease. When deep sleep is disrupted night after night over years, that clearing process cannot complete, and beta amyloid accumulates gradually within neural tissue. This data is actively being researched, and no absolute conclusions have been established, but it is persuasive enough to make deep sleep a significant medical priority, not merely a comfort issue. Now for the financial impact, something rarely discussed, but very real in the lives of older Americans. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, untreated sleep disorders cost the American economy over $430 billion annually, including healthcare spending, reduced productivity, and accidents. At the individual level, the cost of treating chronic insomnia in the United States, including prescription medications, sleep studies, and follow-up appointments, can range from $2,000 to $5,000 annually for those without comprehensive coverage. Medicare Part B currently covers sleep studies for suspected sleep apnea, and an increasing number of CBTI programs are being covered by insurance, which is worth discussing with your own physician. The immediate consequences of sleep deprivation for older adults include significantly increased fall risk, because reflexes and balance are meaningfully impaired after a night of fewer than 6 hours of sleep. Falls are the leading cause of injury-related death in Americans over 65, with more than 36 million falls reported annually, according to CDC data, more than the entire population of California. Quality of life is also affected in subtler ways that matter just as much. The ability to concentrate, to drive safely, to hold a real conversation, and simply to enjoy the day in front of you. And there is clearly a bidirectional relationship. Poor sleep worsens mood, and worsened mood deepens poor sleep. A loop that recalibrates itself downward with every passing night. All of this adds up, not to cause alarm, but to help you recognize that your sleep deserves to be treated as a genuine medical priority, not a luxury and not a minor adjustment. And this is where the story turns to what you can actually do with this information. The changes most strongly supported by the science are not things you purchase. They are things you do. And most of them are things our grandparents did naturally without thinking twice. Dimming the lights in your home, beginning at 7 or 8 p.m., is one of the most evidence-supported interventions for supporting natural melatonin onset, and asking your physician about this at your next visit is a very reasonable starting point. Morning sunlight exposure within the first hour after waking is one of the most evidence-backed interventions for resetting the circadian rhythm, according to research from Stanford University in 2022. Moderate physical activity, whether 30 minutes of morning walking, gardening, or swimming, as appropriate for your condition, is one of the most effective, evidence-backed interventions for sleep quality in older adults, and is something any physician can discuss with you. There is a medical field advancing that is changing how we approach sleep with aging, which is personalized sleep medicine, where genetic testing and biomarker data allow interventions to be tailored to individuals, rather than applied as a one-size-fits-all solution. At-home sleep monitoring devices are growing more accurate and increasingly integrated into mainstream medical care, allowing physicians to view your actual sleep data over weeks rather than relying solely on how you feel during a 10-minute appointment. What modern sleep medicine is learning is what our grandparents practiced by instinct. That sleep is not something to manage, but the result of a way of living. Ongoing research at the National Institutes of Health and leading American universities is generating new behavioral therapies, non-invasive brain stimulation protocols, and integrated care models that embed sleep medicine within primary care, and that may reshape how older Americans access sleep treatment in the next decade. But all of that progress still begins in the same place. A conversation with your physician where you tell the truth about your sleep, rather than assuming it is just an age thing not worth mentioning. Older Americans today are facing something our grandparents never had to face, which is life inside an environment specifically designed to keep us awake. And learning to live within that environment while still sleeping well is one of the genuine health challenges of this era. Our grandparents did not have different genetics. Their brains were not superior to ours. They simply lived in a world that had not yet learned how to steal human sleep. 1 in 3 American adults. That number does not change simply because you watched this video. But what can change is the question you bring to your physician at your next appointment, and perhaps the hour you turn your lights off tonight.